Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome everybody to Bank of America. And as we embark on Politico's new chapter in their incredible journalistic journey. We all know the great track record that Politico has had, and Bank of America is very pleased to have partnered with Politico over the recent years. Robert Kennedy once said that the right to criticize must be accompanied by the responsibility of studying the facts and knowing the issues. And the role that Politico has played here in Washington and around the country in getting the facts on the table, on getting people to understand the issues, has been so valuable that this new chapter that Politico is now entering into is something that Bank of America is absolutely delighted to be a part of. The journalists at Politico, the editors at Politico, the business side at Politico have all been terrific partners. Bank of America has had the privilege of working with Mike Allen on the Playbook Breakfast for a number of years now. It's been a terrific opportunity to get leading policymakers before the wide audiences around the country. It's been a great pleasure for Bank of America to do that. And we're absolutely delighted to be here as we embark on this new chapter in long-form journalism that Politico is undertaking. We're very proud of the team at Politico. We're very happy to be partnering with them, and we're absolutely delighted to have everybody here tonight for this exciting event. So it's now my privilege to introduce the Chief Operating Officer of Politico, Kim Kingsley.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. What a nice introduction. We feel the same. We're super, super excited about this partnership and to be here in your lovely space tonight. On behalf of our publisher, Robert Albritton, and the entire Politico team, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here this evening and thank everyone for tuning into the live stream. It's a very exciting day for us at Politico. It was just over 4 months ago when we brought Susan Glasser on board and heard her vision for POLITICO Magazine. We were sold right away. Today it became a reality online, and tomorrow it launches in print, but we were lucky enough to have all these great copies here tonight. The goal of POLITICO Magazine is to convene the most interesting, provocative, and important thinkers and writers around the ideas that are driving American politics. We're excited to delve into a new field of journalism and are so delighted to have such an amazing group here with us today. A special thanks again to our launch partners, Bank of America. We're so glad to be working with you on this initiative. Politico and Bank of America have been partners for quite a long time. You've been with us from the ground up on many new initiatives, and your involvement has been truly instrumental in moving the needle on many important conversations. We're grateful for your support, and to Jim Mahoney for making this possible tonight. Thank you. And now, as a brief introduction to the magazine, we have a short video.
The bar is higher. So if you're going to create more journalism and you're going to create more conversation, it better be worth breaking through. We're aiming to present stories that you wouldn't necessarily find any other time in Politico, and to do so around big subjects using all the tools at our disposal. Big takes on big subjects. Let's find different ways into the story. Let's not follow the pack. Let's really stand out and differentiate why you should spend time with this. What I've always valued the most in my conversations with Jim Van High and John Harris is their sheer ambition not to win the morning or to win the moment, but to really establish Politico as the owner of its space. That's great. That's exactly, it seems to me, the right kind of ambition for a publishing company at this moment in time, possessing the tools that we could have only have dreamed of.
I've watched Susan Glasser pull this very ambitious plan together over the past 4 months and could not be more impressed by your leadership, your smarts, and your creativity. There's no better person to take on a challenge like this, and I'd like to ask you to come to stage. Thank you, Susan.
Why, thank you, Kim. Thank you so much to Jim for hosting us tonight and for all the partnership with Politico, and we're looking forward to being partners in this as well. You've already heard this sort of inspirational video version of Politico Magazine, so I'm not going to give you any more mission statements. Mostly, I just wanted to say thank you, not only to everyone here tonight, but a particular shout out and thank you to the team, the very small team of Politico Magazine, as well as the bigger team of Politico itself that has just literally worked around the clock. And you know, this website launched about 4:30 this morning. And some of the people who were involved with that are still awake, I think, from doing that. So again, I don't want to go on in the hopes of losing them mid-cocktail, except to say thank you and congratulations to them. The event that we're going to have tonight, I think, reflects part of the ambition of Politico Magazine, which was the idea that we really wanted to not only have a conversation in a whole different way around Washington and the subjects of Washington writ large, but also to do so in different formats. And if you look at that terrific cover that our creative director, Janet Michaud, made, it's a great cover that illustrates Glenn's powerful piece. In some ways, it also, I think, speaks to the broader ambition of the journalism that we're trying to work on for all of you, which is to say, if we can take you inside of the rooms that you're not always necessarily invited into, it's a form of accountability. It's a kind of reporting, I think, that we aspire to with the new magazine, and we're so grateful to have the chance to put it out there. And now we're also going to do it basically in 3D. And so what we thought we'd do tonight is to take some of the powerful stories that Glenn has assembled in terms of what life is really like in Barack Obama's cabinet, and sort of reality check that against cabinet secretaries and their experiences over the last several presidents. So we have someone here from the Clinton administration, from the Bush administration, and from the Obama administration to have a conversation here tonight. And I'm excited that this will be the inauguration of the live version of Politico Magazine. But again, I just do want to thank everyone. Kim has been a wonderful partner and friend in all of this, not to mention a great cheerleader. And without her, without Robert Albritton and John Harrison, Jim Vandeheim, my old friends, this magazine wouldn't exist. So I'm just delighted to have the chance to do this, and thank you all for coming. I think it'll be a fun conversation tonight. Thank you.
Well, good evening, and thank you all very much for coming. Thank you especially Bank of America for hosting us here in this terrific setting. Susan, not just to you, but to everybody involved in this, congratulations. Everybody's really, really proud of you at Politico. You're making Politico a better publication. You're making us all look great. We're really, really happy that this is your new home. We've got, I should point out, a newcomer to our midst. Rick Burke is joining me in the newsroom leadership after Jim Vandeheim moved to the CEO position. Rick Burke from the New York Times is here as our new executive editor. Welcome all. Let me just introduce our esteemed panel. We've got Secretary Ray LaHood representing the Obama administration. Secretary Jim Nicholson from the Bush years. And the person I've known the longest, Secretary Donna Shalala. She and I did battle occasionally, not too often, in the Clinton years. We've known each other and been friends for a long, long time. Thank you very much for joining us. To those who are watching, please remember to tweet your questions at #PoliticoMag. I've got the iPad here ready to take those questions. So let's get started. I guess somebody in our shop, it wasn't me, had a lot of nerve to invite Secretary LaHood, knowing that he would be featured in this magazine piece that we have written, Glenn Thrush as the author, but not knowing that he would not have read it at the time he accepted.
I congratulated Glenn. He did a great job.
So you're a good sport to accept an invitation on specs. The thesis of the piece is that President Obama runs, to an extraordinary degree, an operation that's run out of the West Wing, and the cabinet sometimes feels like outsiders. Comment on the overall thrust of the piece.
I think Glenn got it right. I think the folks that he talked to, I think were articulate in pointing out the way that things really worked for the. I was there 4.5 years, and others were there a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. But the president has a number of trusted people within the West Wing, and but he gave us a long, long leash to do what we needed to do to run our departments. There very little interference. If we screwed up, we heard about it, but
From who?
From generally Rahm. Mm-hmm. When, you know, he is not bashful about telling somebody when they screwed up. But the point is, when it came to transportation, the president had an agenda: high-speed rail, CAFE standards. Within 30 days, he signed the economic recovery. We got $48 billion immediately, and we had 2 years to spend it, and we did it properly. And you know, as long as you were doing things the way they were supposed to be done and sort of carrying out the president's agenda, it was pretty clear you were in charge, and we were in charge, and we put together a great team of people. And the last 4.5 years for me have been the best job I've ever had, and an opportunity to get a lot of things done, to make a difference, to carry out the president's agenda. And it didn't take 218 votes to get any of it done, thank God.
Let me go to our other panelists. This phenomenon of power concentrating in the West Wing, sometimes at the expense of the cabinet, isn't necessarily a new phenomenon. There was the famous story of President Reagan greeted somebody in his own cabinet and called him Mr. Mayor, I think, right? Didn't even recognize his own cabinet secretary. And yet everybody always comes into office saying, I'm going to do more with my cabinet. Does it have to be this way? Is it just the nature of the modern presidency that it's really hard to have a cabinet-focused presidency? Or could it be done differently? And has President Obama hurt himself? Would he be better off if he made more extensive use of the cabinet, not just in their individual areas, as Secretary LaHood described, but on more broadly in terms of the strategy of the administration? Donna?
I'm not so sure. Yeah, it is the nature of the presidency now. There's no question. They have more staff people than they've ever had before. Policy is the name of the game, and they want to control the policy development process as such. They're not as interested in the day-to-day operations of the department. They pretty much leave that to the cabinet officers. They identify a handful of things in which they want you to get done, and then you work with the White House staff on it. But the other thing is, he's surrounded by people that are focused on the policy questions and the interface between policy and politics. It's not on the day-to-day management of large, complex government agencies. So, yeah, it's the nature of the White House, but it's also the nature of the town. What are they interested in? What are you interested in? As a journalist, you're interested in the policy development process and the politics of that, not very interested in the administration of Social Security or NIH or any of those agencies.
Dr. Nicholson?
Well, I would concur what's been said. And, you know, Ray did a great job. You'd expect that of a Republican in that cabinet. And I don't think it's surprising that the president or a president cannot, you know, stay in close touch with what you're doing, nor should he. But the staff does, or at least in my experience in the 3 years at the leash at OMB particularly, that's, you know, the VA is kind of a unique department in that if you're the secretary there, you're the CEO of the big operating healthcare. We see 1 million patients a week. And if you get it right 99% of the time, you still have 10,000 problems a week. And they get attention. And that gets attention from the White House staff, not particularly the president. When the president called me in Rome to ask if I'd come home and be the Secretary of VA, I came back for a visit, and he said, our veterans are our most precious citizens, and that's how I want you to treat them. And that's, I think, the mantra of our country. And he just stood back and let me operate the agency as a good CEO of the country would. And when we had some major issues that I thought I should talk to him about, he was available to do that, and we had those.
Secretary LaHood, you say, let's say you've got a friend who's up for a cabinet job, never mind some new president of either party. What do you tell your friend that he or she must insist upon before taking the job? What's on your list?
I think some access to the White House. I think some access. You're not going to have access to the president because the president has so many important things, and everybody in this room and everybody in this town knows that. But certainly access to the chief of staff, access to the director of OMB, because they control so much of what the agencies do. So some access to a high-level person that's close to the president, and the opportunity, I think, to have some. I think in the cabinet I served in, there was a collegiality among the cabinet members. We worked very well together. I worked well with Sean Donovan at HUD, with Lisa Jackson at EPA. Lisa and I worked together for a year on raising the CAFE standards, which was unheard of, couldn't have been done in other administrations. I think, having a cabinet that works well together is also very important.
You really have to get the president to assure you that you have considerable influence over the appointments below you. If those individuals are sort of picked by a White House personnel office, most of whom have never run anything large and complex, and don't necessarily know who the president knows.
And let's
it's
face
very
it, they're there to
difficult.
be your minders, right? That's why.
Exactly. And I was almost vicious on the selection of the IG because I wanted a professional. I did not want some lawyer coming out of the campaign to be the inspector general of the department. The same thing for the general counsel of the department. But I got a sign-off from the president and the vice president before there was a White House personnel office. I had been in Washington before. I knew exactly what to do. And I knew who the president knew in terms of leading experts on the subjects. I sort of had a general idea of who we should try to recruit. So I ran over to the White House and got the sign-off on, I think, 75% of the appointments. But and you learn how to work the system. I remember there was someone I really wanted for a particularly senior job. I told them, don't give me the resume. Send it over to the White House, because I knew the White House would send it over on the list. I could pick it off the list, and the White House couldn't say that it wasn't off the list. So you learn how to do that. The other thing that we did that I learned in the Carter administration was I took people from the campaign, particularly people who had worked high enough up in the campaign who were under 30. Who had good degrees, and because I knew they were going to count. Bruce Lindsay was going to say, how many people did you hire from the campaign? So I told my chief of staff, who had run the campaign in New York, who was a Rhodes Scholar with Stephanopoulos, I was no dummy about who should be the chief of staff, I said, go find a couple of dozen really smart young people that'll be waiting around for appointments. We'll make them assistants to people, grab them, and by the time Bruce got around, he said, gee, you've hired a lot of people from the campaign. So we combined people who had themselves access to the White House because they had worked on the campaign with very senior people who were experts in their subject that could run the CDC and the FDA and the National Institutes of Health, and in the case of David Ellwood and Mary Jo Bain, the big welfare pieces who the president knew. So the Democratic Party is 10 deep on all of these. But you have to learn and you have to know enough to be able to say, I won't take the job unless there's some veto on people, and you have to argue your case. And sometimes you have to go right to the president and say, I don't want to make that appointment. this is the reason why. And I only had to do that once, and he said, okay, I'll take your judgment on this. And
Secretary Nicholson, one of the things I was struck by in Glenn Thrush's piece is that you've got highly accomplished people, many of whom have faced the voters themselves already, so they know a thing or two about politics, and in many cases they know a lot about policy. They've got substantial public careers, and yet they are effectively taking orders from 30-year-old West Wing aides who have done none of that. And I was left thinking, why don't these accomplished people just tell the West Wing to go to hell? Or would that not work? Maybe there's a reason I'm not a cabinet secretary.
Well, sometimes they did. I remember Bob Gates doing that one day, right after a cabinet meeting in the cabinet room. But you know, that depends on the leadership of the cabinet secretary. I mean, because it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, they can respect the job that those young folks have, but they know whom they work for, and if they have a big enough issue, they know how to get it taken care of, even with the chief of staff, or if they have to, they seek some time with the president. But I think all cabinets probably develop a personality, or as Ray said, a congeniality, and you kind of do a workaround. I mean, the cabinet meetings, my experience in the 3 years on the cabinet was that there's not a lot of colloquy. They're pretty scripted. They have to be. They're short. We were a wartime cabinet, but you figure it out. We hosted lunches in our departments. I had one because I wanted Don Rumsfeld to know what the VA was doing on electronic medical records and how far we had come. So I wouldn't schedule that till I had Rumsfeld and Mike Levitt to come, and we had it at the VA hospital up here on Irving Street and in the cafeteria. I mean, we pushed trays through and then sat in a room, and I demonstrated an electronic medical record to the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of HHS, neither of whom had ever seen that in the 3D of the pulsation of the guy's heart. And Rumsfeld said, holy cow, he had no idea. And my whole goal there, of course, was to try to get the DOD onto electronic medical records so that when they come to the VA as alumni from DOD, they have an electronic medical record. I'm sorry to say that hasn't yet happened.
Secretary LaHood, did you ever tell Rahm to go to hell?
About once a week. When he told me to go, I told him to go to hell.
All right. Very good.
In polite company, we don't say what Rahm actually says.
I must say, I've told him that.
Yeah,
from
I'm
time
sure
to
you
time,
have.
and vice versa.
You know, it's interesting. I work with Ram too. He never swore in front of me. You know, you have to
He was probably a
work.
teenager back then,
Yeah.
if that were the case.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't generalize about the 30-year-olds. I mean, there are some that are aggressive and call and say, this is the White House, you have to do this. But you know the difference between the 30-year-old that's calling you and someone who's chief of staff and close to the president. But you also have to work the White House staff. I used to tell new cabinet officers, go at least a half hour to an hour before the cabinet meeting and walk around in the West Wing and have conversations. You have to develop personal relationships with people, because at the end of the day, that's how you work the system. And I developed very good personal relationships myself, let alone the fact that my staff had worked in the campaign. Some of the young staff people had worked together in the campaign, but we worked those relationships. And sometimes when my staff would get frustrated with someone, I'd say, don't worry, you know, 5 years from now, that young person is going to be calling me for a recommendation to get into graduate school. So, we just worked it.
Secretary Shalala, you were Health and Human Services Secretary. Right now, that's the big story in the news, the debacle of the healthcare website and all sorts of associated questions about whether the Affordable Care Act would work. Based on your knowledge of the federal healthcare system and your knowledge of government generally, how did this debacle happen in your view?
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think the government is particularly good at technology, but I also don't think the private sector is either. I mean, if you look at the stretch that it's been for all of us in introducing medical technology and other kinds of things. Even VA went through a period, but they didn't have the cameras on them. This is a software problem. It's solvable. Should it have been tested before? The secretary would have said that. It should have been pre-tested. They probably should have laid it out in a different way. There's not a conceptual problem, though, with the program itself. All they're trying to do is to give larger numbers of people who don't have health insurance, make sure they get subsidies to pay for it. So I think they're going to get it solved if they're allowed the time to work through the challenges. If the states had decided to do it on their own, we wouldn't be in the middle of this. The fact is, they had to set up a national system, and they never thought they were going to have a national system. When the program first was rolled out, remember, the states were going to run the exchanges. They were going to put people on their Medicaid platforms, which they already had. So yes, it's a debacle. Yes, they have to work it through, but they have to work it through within the glaring light of politics. And every misstep, whether it's misspeaking or it's something else, is going to be caught. So there's not room for error. That's the nature of politics now. But I understand how it could happen because I've been there. I got nervous every time we had to do some big scale thing, whether it was the privacy regs or getting millions of children on the kids' health insurance or immunizations. Just made me nervous because these big scale things are hard to do, and
So far,
they're
there's not
hard to
been
manage.
any single person within the government at a senior level who's been held directly accountable.
Well, the secretary has taken responsibility for that, for the whole thing. And at the end of the day, the secretary is the person responsible. Whether they there are people that had the titles as such, but it's the interface between the technology and actual people that have to use the technology. And it's just a complicated software problem, and it looks like they're going to be able to smooth it out. I got on the other day, and I didn't have any particular problem. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, but listen, Part D was horrendous. I remember that Christmas vacation. My mother had a schedule for me of every elderly person she knew to get them on Part D. And the people in the administration that ran Part D went through the same kinds of pain. Everybody said it wasn't going to work. It wasn't quite as partisan. But these big programs are hard, and you can second guess them. But at the end of the day, if we can't do anything, I know we can do software and we can sort it out.
I'd love to take some questions in just a moment. Before I do, Secretary Nicholson, you're a former Republican National Committee chairman, right? I'd like to ask you from your perspective as a Republican, as a Bush administration veteran, when the government had problems delivering on its promises at Katrina in 2005, and those were straightened out within a couple of weeks, but it was really bad bureaucratic bungling. That became a metaphor for the entire administration and tied to the president directly, who was seen as somehow insensitive to suffering and so forth. Do you see a double standard here in how this is being portrayed?
Sometimes I do, in that I really think this is, it's not just a software problem, it's a competency problem. I mean, this was initiated by this administration. You can argue the policy or not, but it passed, and they had responsibility to implement it. They were asked to delay it. They did not, and meaning they thought probably they could deliver this, and they haven't. And there's a great amount of confusion, some suffering out there. People have lost their insurance, and so I think it does speak to the competency of the administration, and I think it's fair as you know, they sought in Katrina to portray that as a competency issue, that they be held to that level. It sometimes seems to me, and I don't mean this to sound overly partisan, but they do very well when they can delegate something to the military in this administration, but they seem to have some problems sometimes when they can't.
But even the military has problems with cost overruns and managing. Let's be fair. When we get into these big complex situations, there's a whole pattern of in the military of cost overruns, of a failure to implement. I mean, this isn't the first agency, and I don't excuse it. I mean, there really is no excuse for taking on a responsibility and doing it, but large, complex systems are tough to manage.
We've got hands if anybody wants to throw in a question for these folks. Just please flag me if so. Secretary LaHood, how important is it to have a close personal rapport with a president, or does that not necessarily matter?
It does matter. I cherish the friendship I had with then Senator Obama when he and I worked together in the Illinois delegation, and we became friends, and we did a lot of work together. I was on the Appropriations Committee. He asked me to be helpful on some things for Chicago. He was very helpful in the Senate for my Central Illinois district, and we became friends. And I ran into him when he was running for president in the Capitol, and I had announced my retirement. He said to me, "What are you going to do when you leave Congress?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "If this thing works out for me," meaning getting elected president, "I'm going to be looking for a few Republicans." And he was in the heat of a campaign. And our friendship is a rich friendship, one that I cherish very much. And one of the reasons I took the job is because I thought this was going to be one of the most historic administrations in the history of our country. I like politics, I like policy, and I like the thought of the fact that transportation is a very bipartisan agency, always has been. Norm Mineta served for 5 years under President Bush. But my friendship with the president goes back to our Illinois days, but has endured all the way through, and I cherish it very much. And it means a lot when you need to talk to the president. When my son, Sam, was caught up in the Egypt thing, the president and I talked one-on-one about that because he took a great deal of interest in that. And that was more of a personal interest in my family. And that meant a lot to our family, that he did take a personal interest and asked about it, and he and I talked about it in a very personal way. So
there's some people that wish that President Obama would do more of that kind of personal outreach, that he would have more of the kind of relationships that you described. And the rap that some people have on him is that he's more like a president who Secretary Shalala served before President Clinton, and more like President Carter, who's just introverted, who doesn't extend himself enough at the personal level to Washington. What do you make of that?
I think it's way overblown. The president is a very personal, hands-on. He's a relationship person. He has a relationship. During the 4.5 years with the cabinet members that I knew, I didn't hear any grousing or complaining about the fact that people didn't have enough access. If they needed to see the president, if they wanted to talk to the president invited several of us for lunch, several cabinet members for lunch. I played golf with the president probably on a number of occasions, as did other cabinet members. I think this is something that's sort of been created that doesn't quite fit his personality. This guy is a warm, genuine person who cares about people, and particularly the people that work for him.
Got a question here?
I'm curious if any of the cabinet secretaries, maybe
Please
any of the
identify
cabinet
yourself.
secretaries could.
And your book too,
I
Peter.
I'm Peter Baker, husband of the editor of POLITICO Magazine. I'm struck by this question of when John raised the question of accountability. When do cabinet secretaries decide to resign in order to spare a president heat? President Bush obviously was very reluctant to fire Secretary Rumsfeld, to fire Attorney General Gonzalez. In both cases, he felt very loyal to the people under him. In both cases, other people in the administration wished those cabinet secretaries had taken it upon themselves to leave earlier. Kathleen Sebelius right now is obviously sticking around. You know, at what point should a cabinet secretary say, "I'm out of here, even if it's not my fault, something went wrong. I'm gonna fall on the sword for the president"?
Well, there clearly is a point where there is a point where you take full responsibility, as Secretary Sebelius has, but the whole issue of if you feel personally responsible to the point where you're hurting the presidency, then I think you have an obligation to tell the president you want to go. There are other times. During the Monica Lewinsky scandal, there was clearly a discussion, but a decision to stay because it was more important to the country that we hung together. But there's simply, clearly there's a line there. And most members of the cabinet are really grown-ups and have some sense of that and their responsibility, not just to the individual presidents, but to the presidency itself and to the country when it's appropriate.
Peter, this is really the president's call. Yeah. It really is. This is a very personal thing. These people are handpicked by the president. Every cabinet member was handpicked by the president after careful deliberation. I know the deliberation that went into my selection, and I know the number of people the president talked to, and it's true for every cabinet member. This is not about an individual deciding they can leave. It's between two people that have a relationship and a friendship, and so I just think you can't discount the fact the president plays a big role in this about whether somebody stays or leaves.
Secretary Nicholson.
Well, I would concur with what Ray just said and say, by the way, Peter, I think Rumsfeld twice offered his resignation to the president, and the president asked him if he would stay. So I think that bespeaks the validity of it's the president's call.
But I also think
And the other thing that's important for a cabinet officer is to know that the president has your back, and that it isn't the case every time you get in trouble that you should be thinking about resigning or he should be thinking about firing you, because in this town, if you're doing anything, you're going to get a lot of heat, and it's going to be continuous. And so you've got to know that the president's backing you up, but ultimately it's his decision and it's his administration, and
But
you're
we also
there at
have-
his sufferance.
We also have the president's back, too. The nature of the job is that there also is an element of loyalty and protection, because part of the job
given.
is to protect the presidency.
I think we've
And
got
to
a
make sure
question
it's
over
effective.
here. We've got,
My name
Yes,
is
ma'am.
Toby Gotti. I served in the National Security Council under President Clinton. My question, though, is that you've been talking about the cabinet as if it exists and the executive branch in a vacuum. But in point of fact, a lot of the problems in the cabinet is because of the problems between the legislature, between the Congress and the executive branch. And how much do you think the difficulties that well, people, some don't get confirmed, so that's 100% difficulty, but so many vacancy signs in these administrations now that it's really difficult to run a large corporation, a large cabinet organization without people at the top. How much do you think the dysfunction in general in Washington has influenced that?
anybody in particular you want to tackle, or can any of the?
Well, look,
or all of them?
as somebody who was elected 7 times to the House, I will say this. The reason that Congress is at 9%, according to a poll this morning, and the lowest ever maybe in the history, is because they haven't done anything. They haven't solved any problems. They really haven't tackled any. They haven't tackled immigration. They can't pass a farm bill. They haven't tackled tax reform, although they've talked a good game about it. There is no budget. And so having a dysfunctional Congress is not helpful to the other branches of government. And when you look at, when I came into office in '94, Newt became Speaker, and even though he was a lightning rod, he and Bill Clinton, under Republicans in the House and in the majority, and under President Clinton, we passed 3 balanced budgets, we passed welfare reform, and we got around to NAFTA. We got around to doing a lot of important things, moving the country forward. When I worked for Bob Michael as his chief of staff for 12 years, he and Tip worked together with President Reagan for 8 years, and they got a lot of good things done. And so this idea that because somebody's in control and somebody's of the opposite parties in the White House, you can't get things done is nonsense. That is not the history of our country. Everett Dirksen was minority leader when he worked with Lyndon Johnson to pass the Civil Rights Bill, which we're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of. This idea that things are dysfunctional in part is because we have a Congress that doesn't want to do anything.
Look, Norm Ornstein's here, who has written on this specific issue when you have this many vacancies. The fact is there are too many people that have to go through the confirmation process. We ought to be able to put through the government with the key people having to go through the confirmation process and an ability to appoint the rest of the managers directly without the confirmation process. But there are just too many people that have to go through. And when you do have those vacancies, it's a problem running these agencies when you have vacancies over a long period of time. We didn't suffer from much of that. And I was able to keep almost all of my people for 8 years, so that made a big difference. And we moved people around, particularly those young people, a little bit to reinforce that, but it's a problem.
Look, I think if it's, all right, Norm, you're going to get the last word because it's incumbent upon us. If we're going to invite people for cocktails and a panel discussion, then I think it's incumbent upon us to let them get to cocktails. Norm? You are indeed the expert. I would love to give you the last word.
Thanks, John. I actually want to ask about another element of the dysfunction. You are managers, and we have now operated for years without appropriations, now without a single appropriations bill. How can anybody in the public or private sector manage when you don't know what your budget's going to be, not just for the year, but for the next month, when you have to spend time figuring whether you're going to have to shut things down, and then take it to another level? How do you manage when you deal with sequesters that are across-the-board cuts where you can't manage? Talk about some of the challenges of governing as managers in this atmosphere.
Sequester is the worst idea that's ever happened in Washington. It just simply is. It's a meat-axe approach. Not one of us you can't run government with sequestration. Nobody would do it with their own budget. And it's created a huge, big mess. And a lack of appropriation bills is a very, very serious problem. But you need to get a budget first so that the appropriators know what the dollars are and know how to distribute them. And I know that Chairman Ryan and Chairman Patty Murray are working on that, thankfully. Hopefully they'll get somewhere. If they do, then there'll be some appropriation bills. But it's pretty hard to do without it.
The VA was left out of the sequester at the interest of taking care of our veterans coming back from the conflicts. But sequester in a literal execution is a terrible way to manage, and they should have and should, if they're going to fix the amount for a department, allow that department head to prioritize how he wants to use or she wants to use those resources, because they ought to know their needs better than anybody else. And I think Congress should defer that judgment to them.
I mean, I think that's the point. It's almost impossible to manage when you don't know where your next dollars are coming from, but you also don't have any flexibility. And the inability to move the money around is almost as big a problem as the amounts. That's gotten worse and worse every year as Congress has restrained administrations in terms of whether they had any flexibility. And so it's extremely difficult to do it, and it requires very skillful management and really working on priorities to keep people's morale up and to keep them working.
Can I just say one word? Just because I know we're going to wrap up. I think I probably speak for everybody in this room. Congratulations to Politico. You guys have kind of taken over the universe. You've gathered a great group of people. I know everybody looks forward to reading the paper in the morning. The magazine is terrific, Susan, so congratulations on that. Politico is, I know that there's probably people here from the Washington Post and the New York Times, but be careful, they're coming.
You are nice to say that. We are proud of our publication. We've worked hard at it and had a lot of fun doing it. That's a pretty good combo. So anyway, I want to congratulate the author of this terrific piece, Glenn Thrush. She's got 500,000 page views. And I want to thank our cabinet secretaries for a really great conversation.
Thank you.
All right.